Okay, so today we're going to be talking about what I would recommend if you hated some of my favorite books. It's gonna be fun. So I posted on Instagram and asked you guys to tell me which of my favorite books you hated and why, so that I could explain to you why you're wrong on a fundamental level and you should change who you are as a person. I'm just kidding. I want to help you find books that might be better for you if my favorite recommendations didn't work out. Because we're all individuals, reading is subjective, no book is going to work for everybody. But before we get into that, a shout out to today's sponsor, Squarespace. From websites to online stores to marketing tools to analytics, Squarespace is an all-in-one platform that helps you to build your website and grow your business. But we'll talk more about them at the end of the video. So apparently this video was better in concept than it was in execution because half of the responses I got I couldn't use because either they said, I hate this book because I didn't like it, which tells me nothing, or it told me too much and it contains spoilers about the book so I can't put it in the video, or it was stuff that I really just can't help you with. Like there were quite a few people that said that they didn't like The Lord of the Rings because it was too boring or because of the writing style, which there's not much I could do for you for that because I don't like the writing style, doesn't really tell me what kind of writing style you do like, and it's too boring. I just genuinely couldn't think of an epic fantasy that has really tight pacing. Usually epics are more slow. Granted, Lord of the Rings takes that up a notch, but still, epics tend to be slower paced. But there were quite a few that I could help you with, so I'm going to attempt to do that. This person says that the yellow wallpaper was too short, which granted it is 16 pages long, so I get you, no problem. Here's some Gothic horrors that may work out better for you. If you're looking for more classics, The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde is fantastic. The picture of Dorian Gray is, I like it even better, and they're similar, but they're very different, and they're both so good. If you haven't been spoiled for them yet, if you have been spoiled for them, then it's not quite as fun to read. I should probably tell you a little bit about them. Actually, I'm not going to tell you anything about this because I have no idea how to describe this without spoilers. Dorian Gray is about a handsome young man who's told he's handsome one too many times. A portrait is painted of him and his handsomeness. It all goes to his head. We have discussions from there. Camilla is, I think, the very first vampire novel, short story, ever written. I'm not sure, but it's definitely one of the first. A Woman in Black, I haven't actually read this one yet, but it's on the top of my Gothic horror list that I want to read. I actually just ordered it last night, gonna be reading it soon. And if you want a more modern Gothic horror, Mexican Gothic is one that I recently read that I enjoyed quite a bit. All of these are longer than 16 pages, so hopefully they'll scratch that itch for you. Peter Pan, because he's an evil little brat. I mean, you're right, he is, but that's the point. But that's okay, no worries. If you want a classic fairy tale that's more whimsical without a little brat as a character, I mean, he's layered. There's layers to him, but yeah, he's not supposed to be fun to hang around with. If you want something less in that vein, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland is an obvious one. Also, if you haven't read the original Beauty and the Beast, it might scratch that itch for you, but truthfully, I've read a lot of classic fairy tales and they're almost always dark. They almost always are not Disney-fied. So if you don't like following morally gray or dark characters or darker themes in your fairy tales, modern fairy tales are a better bet. Just Ella is one of my favorites, which did show up a couple times in this, but I didn't pick it because it was almost always just like, it was bland, which I can't help you with. I don't find it bland. But that's a middle grade that I grew up reading and loved. The Wayward Children series, all of these are very short books. They are novels, I think, not short stories. But they're all very short, and I didn't really like the first one, but I've liked every one since then. The Lunar Chronicles are full novels, and they're all based off of classic fairy tales with a sci-fi twist, and they're all very wholesome and fun and sweet to read. And A Curse So Dark and Lonely is a Beauty and the Beast modern retelling. The Name of the Wind. I don't hate, but I don't love The Name of the Wind. I love the school setting, but not the rest. That's fine. The Name of the Wind is a very polarizing book. So I'm going to recommend you some more books in a school setting. Most of these I've read, most of these I've enjoyed, but they don't all fit the bill. The Magicians is the only one that I haven't read of this grouping, but I plan to read it soon. It's high on my fantasy TBR, and I know that it's a school setting. Red Sister is a nun assassin training school with magic. It's a school setting. Ender's Game is sci-fi, not fantasy. It follows kids in a school setting. Percy Jackson, it's technically a summer camp setting, but they're learning about Greek mythology and fighting, and it's, you probably know about Percy Jackson. Sufficiently Advanced Magic is kind of like a fantasy dystopian. There's like this giant tower that has a like maze and puzzles that they're trying to solve to get to the top of the tower so that they can have essentially a blessing from a goddess. The main character's trying to get his brother back, but it's also a school setting, so it's like classroom, adventure, classroom, adventure. It might be good. Oh, and then there's Skyward by Brandon Sanderson, which is also sci-fi, but it's like classroom flight training, school setting. Also, there's Harry Potter, but you probably know about that one too. I Hate the Cursed Child because it did not make sense from beginning to end. Sir, do you think I like this book? This actually also came up a lot in these comments. Stuff like this, or like a Court of Thorns and Roses. Do you think I like these my favorite books? I am insulted. I am offended. Lies of Locke Lamora because it had too many flashbacks that made me tired of reading it. So Lies of Locke Lamora is probably the book that came up the most in these Instagram messages, which I'm not surprised about at all, because while the Gentleman Bastard series isn't a underrated or unpopular series out in the world, it's very unpopular within BookTube. So I'm not surprised that it has such mixed. It seems like with Gentleman Bastards, there's like the fandom, the people who love it, and then there's the rest of the world that are like, no. And I get it. It's not a perfectly digestible story with the way it's written, and it's not going to mesh with everybody's taste. And there's nothing wrong with that. I understand that it's not for everybody. But the thing that came up the most often with The Lies of Locke Lamora was that it had too many flashbacks, or the beginning was really boring. They couldn't get into it. So I haven't read a lot of books with this general concept. So this was a hard one for me to recommend, but I'm going to attempt it because a lot of people don't like this series, which I get, but I'm never going to stop loving it unless Scott Lynch ruins it. Which, this is going to be a weird recommendation for this, but I'm going to try Best Served Cold. The reason I say that is because The Lies of Locke Lamora is kind of grimdark without going too far into grimdark. It has brutal scenes and that, but it's not like George R.R. Martin, which I think is kind of where Joe Abercrombie lives with how dark he makes his worlds. It has a crew of people, of very different types of people. It's very character focused, and they all come together to accomplish a goal. And it's very different, but I feel like if you liked certain things about The Lies of Locke Lamora, but it just took too long to get into, or the flashbacks were too jarring, this has a similar feel to it and might give you something similar. It might accomplish similar things without the stuff that a lot of people don't tend to like about Lies. Oh, a lot of people said they didn't like the Gentleman Bastard series because too much swearing. Best Served Cold isn't gonna help you with that one though. But some other options that might help you out, we have Foundry Side, which is also about a heist and a crew of different types of people coming together, but it's much faster paced. It's much more, it's not as like dark and edgy as both Joe and Scott write. And in general, I think it's just a lot more digestible for the masses, a lot less of a niche sort of a story, and I really enjoyed it. I haven't read Theft of Swords yet, but I asked my friend who really likes it, and she said that this is a heist book, or at least the first part of it is, so you might like that. She says that it's a lot of fun and a great book, and I plan on reading it soon. And according to Google, I didn't back this up with any of my friends, but according to Google, The Legend of Eli Monpress is also a heist novel that is very well received, and it's also pretty high on my list of books that I want to read soon. I hate Wuthering Heights because displaying the cycle accurately is not the same as criticizing it. So, I would argue that there are some really great discussions within that book, but I think I understand what you mean. Some readers just want a lot more discussions, like social discussions or political discussions or moral discussions within the book. I don't tend to lean that way. I usually much prefer very subtle discussions taking place in the book, very subtle things happening within the book that cause the readers to have discussions outside of the book, as opposed to the author creating discussions within the book. So it feels, I guess my preference is more of the author facilitating the opportunity for discussions outside of the book, as opposed to the author having discussions with the reader within the book. But that is a preference thing. One is not better than the other, and a lot of people prefer having the discussions within the book rather than them kind of just being facilitated. So, no problem. This one was actually a little bit harder for me to come up with an answer for, since this isn't my preference personally, but Frederick Buckman, I think, oftentimes will tread that line between having the discussions within the story and facilitating discussions outside of it. I think he kind of like walks that line pretty well so that it can be satisfying for either side, whichever type of reader you are. But I would say Anxious People is the only book of his where I read where I felt like he totally went over onto the side of having a discussion. Like the author and the reader are talking. The author is facilitating these discussions within the story in a very blatant way. So if you have any interest in picking up Bachman, I think you may enjoy that one because he does a lot of that in that book. I hesitate to recommend this, but if you want to try another classic, The Bell Jar, I think could work. Classics do lean more towards facilitating discussions as opposed to having them right there. So it's kind of harder for me to keep you in a classic with this, but The Bell Jar, I think, does a pretty good job of really challenging what's happening within the book, especially within the characters' mind. This one is discussing mental health and how poorly mental health was treated back in the day. And then you can also try The Only Good Indians. This is, again, a book that I haven't read yet, but a booktuber that I follow very closely, Books and Lala, who personally prefers having those discussions within the book. She recently read this and loved it, and I plan on reading it really soon because it looks fantastic. So this one may scratch that itch as well. I know that it discusses racism, and I think it actually discusses like generational cycles as well. Probably not in the same way as Wuthering Heights, but I'm pretty sure that's a theme in this as well. Lord of the Rings, utter lack of female characters and incredibly boring. So this one's a little bit harder because this doesn't give me a good idea of what your tastes are. So I don't want to just chuck a bunch of books at you that have a good amount of female characters in them. So what I decided to do is, speaking specifically, since you said Lord of the Rings, I'm assuming that you want epic fantasy. I decided to recommend to you The Priory of the Orange Tree, even though this wasn't a book that worked for me. This is an epic story with a massive world, really interesting magic, and ticks a lot of the boxes, and it has the two main characters are both female. There's a lot of females, side characters within the story. It passes the, I don't remember what this is called, Bechdel test? I know what it is, it's not something that I look for in stories, so I don't even remember how to pronounce it. But I think that this will give you a fantasy that is epic in scope that will be more likely to fit what you're looking for. I hate the troop because of the intense animal abuse. Me too. I really hated those scenes too. Unfortunately, animal abuse is a pretty common thing within horror novels. The way I handle it is I just skim those scenes and don't think about them, and it doesn't usually affect my enjoyment of the book, but I do understand that not everybody can do that. So what I am recommending to you is going to be Tunnel of Bones, which is super different from The Troop, but the reason I'm recommending it is because Tunnel of Bones, it's a middle grade horror, so it's a lot lighter on horror, and it's not even kind of the same theme, it's ghosts, but she does have an animal companion, so my apologies, just pointing you towards something that clearly was not what you wanted. Hopefully her wonderful cat will make you, the cat's not really an animal companion, but it's a relevant part of the story, so hopefully that'll be a good enough apology. Plus, I just really like the story. I've read the first and second book, and they were both so much fun. And if you want something not middle grade, Cenote is a short story, but I really, really enjoyed it, and it gave those like intense, every minute counts, kind of on the edge of your seat suspense sort of vibes that I got from the troupe. And there's no animal violence in it. Jane Austen, writing was slow and the language was hard to grasp. So I get you. I love you. Jane Austen is so highly loved and regarded among classics readers that I think it feels like she should be more digestible than she is, and I get it. But there are so many fantastic period piece sort of romances that have that big house and fun romantic dynamics sort of feel that Pride and Prejudice, that Jane Austen has. So some recommendations. I Capture the Castle, which is more YA feeling, and it was such a fun story. North and South, which is really similar, but had a very unique way about it, especially the ending. Man, I really loved the ending of North and South. And The Remains of the Day, which I have not read yet, but have heard it's very Jane Austen-esque, but much more digestible and much more like modernized. One comment that came up a ton was that my characters, or like the characters that I love, the worlds that I love, were too dark for people. Like, oh my goodness, it came up so often. Like, all of the characters in Rebecca were terrible people. Why would you like them? Or like Peter Pan was a horrible person to hang out with. Who would want to spend time with him? Or like the world in The Lies of Locke Lamora, the world in the First Law trilogy is way too dark for me. And I don't know, man, I like dark themes. I like morally messed up characters. I think it's so interesting to get in their heads. But this video was actually super fun for me to plan for and to film because all of the reasons given for why people hated my favorite books were all really reasonable things, like something's too dark, or something that came up all the time for Daphne du Maurier is that her books were so boring, they were so slowly paced, and like her intentional and deliberate pacing is one of my favorite things about what she writes. There were so many things that people would say, this didn't work for me, and it made total sense, and that's why reading is so subjective, is because what is perfect for one person is going to be the absolute worst for the next person. And I loved that. I loved going through it and seeing these really reasonable reasons why my favorites didn't work for people, but then it's just like solidifying that's what I love about these books. So if you're one of those people, if you picked up one of my favorite books and it didn't work out for you for very specific reasons, I hope I pointed you in a direction to go where you might get the thing that you were looking for and that you missed in my favorites. Hopefully you'll be able to find it in some of these other books. Like I said at the beginning of the video, I couldn't get to all of them because either they were spoiler filled or they weren't specific enough, or they were things that like a lot of people said that they didn't like Bachman's prose. That's not something I can help you with because I don't know what kind of prose you like. But I did try. I tried to get as many as I could that I could give you specific, point you in better directions. And I hope that this helped, and I hope that it was enjoyable to watch. So there you go. Those are all the books that we're going to be discussing in this video. And now, an ad. I live in a fantasy world where clouds are made of cotton candy. I am queen of the realm, and websites are actually fun and easy to make.
Hey, say your lines!
Creating a website and it being fun and enjoyable may seem like a fantasy, but it's not. Squarespace actually makes it really fun. They have pre-made templates that you can start with and then change them, move them around, make it your own, and you can build a website fairly quickly and easily this way. You also have audio block features, so if you're a narrator, a filmmaker, a musician, you have the ability to put little sound bites of your podcast, whatever you're doing. And these audio blocks also have iTunes sharing, so it's just really easy to put your audio clips up. They also have social sharing, so you can have little spots where you can link your YouTube videos, your book blog, your Instagram, your Twitter, whatever. You can link it all right there on your website, and it also gives people the ability that they can share your content as well, which means that you get real-time campaign and website analytics from the source. And you get to find out what kind of content is driving traffic in and what's not working as well. I use Squarespace for my website. Corey uses his for his photography. It's a really easy to use website that's so functional and helpful, and I really recommend you check them out. Also, if you use the link in my description, you get a free trial, and when you're ready to launch your campaign, you get 10% off. So check them out, link in the description. I'd love to continue chatting with you about this in the comments. I post videos every Tuesday through Friday. Check out my Patreon if you want to buddy read some things, or if you want to check out some of my writing. I'll see you guys again soon. Bye.